What is up, guys? Today is all about a super important topic, which is interviewing. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of interviewing that goes on during recruiting season, and it can come in a lot of different types. There's career fairs, coding challenges, behaviorals, and technicals. Now, I know in some previous videos I've covered some general interviewing tips, but in this one I wanted to dive deep into each of the types of interviewing and go over how you can succeed at getting yourself a job. And of course, if you're new here, consider subscribing for more videos on computer science, interviewing, college, and Georgia Tech. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is career fairs. And the main thing to remember with career fairs is that you get that face-to-face interaction. And the big thing about this is that prevents you from getting lost in a sea of resumes when you apply online. A lot of people think that career fairs are a waste of time because they wait in this long line just to talk to a company and then they never hear anything back. To an extent, this may be inevitable, but there's a few things that you can do to maximize your chances of hearing back from the company. The first thing you need to keep in mind is that you need to stand out. What you need to remember is that these people are sitting there for hours having candidate after candidate after candidate come and talk to them. If you don't do anything that's memorable and all you do is say your name, your major, and what you're interested in, you're not winning yourself any points. Now, this can definitely be a little bit tricky because you don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons. And one of the main pieces of advice that you'll probably hear from people about career fairs is that you should have a pitch memorized. This is good advice, but odds are you're doing it wrong. Here's what I mean. I'll give an example. If I were to do a pitch right now, like I'm talking about, I would say, "Hi, my name is Kyle. I'm currently a junior studying computer science at Georgia Tech, and I'm interested in one of your summer internship opportunities. On the one hand, I communicate who I am, I communicate what I'm interested in, and what my background is. On the other hand, that sounded just like 1,000 other people's pitches who just came before me. There was nothing about that pitch that stood out. It was the most boring, basic pitch that you could have, even though it was memorized. As a result, the main advice I'll give you is memorize the pitch, but make it impactful. You want to say something that's going to make the person that you're talking to interested. Otherwise, they're going to lose interest and they're only going to care about the next person in the line. And this is going to vary for everyone. For some people, it might be some unique trait or background that they have. For other people, it might be some relevant experience they have in the area that that company works in. The main thing to remember though is that face-to-face time that we're talking about only matters if you use it wisely. The next thing I want to talk about is coding challenges, and odds are most of you have already taken a couple. For those of you who haven't heard of coding challenges, they're essentially a way for a company to test your technical ability before they invest time in personally talking to you. Now, in theory at least, this is beneficial to you and the company. That's because it gives the company an opportunity to test if you actually have the chops for the job, and for you, it gives you a chance to actually show your technical abilities instead of just being weeded out based off your resume. Now, note that I said in theory. That's because not all coding challenges are created equal. I say this because the way that each company uses their results is a little bit of a mystery. I'll give a personal example. I typically like to spend some time at the end of a coding challenge, given that I have time left, on cleaning up my code. 2 years in a row, I had a coding challenge with the same exact company, and 2 years in a row, I got rejected. It wasn't until recently that I learned that this company was actually evaluating people based off the time it took them to get the solution. In my case, since I spent about 15 minutes cleaning up my solution, I appeared to solve it much slower than I actually did. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, companies won't tell you what they're looking for, and as a result, you're kind of going to be in the dark figuring out what exactly you should do when you take a coding challenge. There's definitely a couple pieces of general advice that I'd like to offer, and the first one is make sure you're reading your prompts super carefully. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who can say that they've read a problem quickly, started solving what they thought was the right problem, only to find out halfway through when they tested it that they solved an entirely different problem. And this is awful because it means you probably won't get the best solution, and as a result, you probably won't ever get called back, meaning you wasted all your time. The other piece of advice I can offer depends on the challenge, but if there's multiple languages, don't be afraid to switch between them. Now, if you're someone who only knows one language, this probably isn't for you, but if you're someone who knows a couple languages pretty well, don't be afraid to switch languages if you feel like another one will serve you better. In previous years, there were definitely coding challenges that I started in Java, only to realize a few minutes in that I felt like I could write it a lot faster using C++ or Python. Now, of course, don't wait until the last 5 minutes to decide to switch languages, but in the first few minutes, figure out what kind of language might best suit that problem. The third thing I want to talk about is behavioral interviews. For some people, this comes easily, and for other people, this is worse than the technical. And there's really two main perspectives that I look at this with. The first is that they're asking you questions that there's not really wrong answers to. They want to hear your opinions, they want to see the way you speak, the way you interact with people, and your mannerisms. On the other hand, a lot of people view this like public speaking, and a lot of people get anxiety with public speaking. Behavioral interviews generally don't bother me, but I do have some tips, so if you're someone who struggles with them, Listen up. The first thing you can do is focus on polishing the way you speak and your mannerisms. Now, there's a couple different ways you can do this. The typical one that people talk about is sitting down with a friend and essentially doing an interview with them, and this kind of lets them evaluate you. This definitely can be useful. The main problem though is that it doesn't let you evaluate yourself after the fact. Another thing that people like to do is they like to watch themselves as they speak in the mirror. Personally, I prefer the solution of setting up a camera and talking to it. This is super useful for keeping track of how well you've progressed. You can look at your first video and look at a video you take now, and you can see the differences and how polished you are. The other main thing you can do is take the time to prepare for the common questions. There's no way to predict every question that someone's going to ask you, but for example, some questions like, why do you want to work for company X, or name a time when you struggled with working with teammates, are really common questions. Lists of these types of questions are super common online. I would recommend that you go through a whole list of them, come up with some responses, and then practice giving them either to a friend, in the mirror, or to a camera. The final type of interview is obviously the technical. Now, I've said it in other videos, but I'll say it again. The main thing you need to focus on is your data structures and algorithms. In my experience doing interviews, these are by far the most common types of questions that I face, and being able to do these quickly is essential. Alright, now that I got my obligatory rant about data structures and algorithms out of the way, we can move on to some other stuff. The next thing is that it's super important to practice writing code by hand. Now, it's unlikely that they'll ask you to write with pencil and paper during an interview, but it's definitely not unlikely that they'll ask you to do whiteboarding. So if you have access to a whiteboard, I definitely recommend using that. Also, if you have a language listed on your resume, you better be able to code in it. I say this because I know a lot of people like to fluff up their resumes with languages and technologies that they're not really that familiar with, but believe me, just don't do it. Trust me, there is nothing worse than showing up to an interview and being asked to code in a language that you don't even know. The final thing I want to say is that you should focus on getting a simple working solution first and make your optimizations later. I think a lot of people get really hung up on trying to find the best solution first, and as a result, they don't end up with any solution. When you first see a problem, think about the first way that you can solve it. It might be brute force, but focus on just solving it. Once you have a solution in mind, think about what the weaknesses are of that algorithm. If you can pick some out, figure out how you can optimize, and as a result, you can make your algorithm faster if you have time. And of course, please make sure that you communicate all of this with your interviewer. There's nothing worse than sitting there in complete silence, writing something up when the interviewer has no clue what's going on. Alright, so hopefully some of those tips were useful. If they were, I would appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button and comment down below if you have other interviewing tips you'd like to share. For more videos like this, be sure to subscribe because there's a bunch more on the way. Alright guys, good luck with your interviews, and I'll catch you in the next one.